Chapter 3, Section 4. In the first problem, we're using the PV formula from our formula sheet. Now, on our formula sheet, here are the present value formulas. And the one we need, the bottom one, has the I's in the ends. So we will use PV equals, now this is PMT, that's 152 in our problem. And then here we have the fraction that on top has a 1 minus 1 plus I, 0.031, to the negative n, which is 19, divided by I, which is 0.031. Now we need to type that into our calculator. So here, on my calculator, I will type 152. I'll go ahead and push the time sign just in case. And then the fraction key, which on my calculator is the green key, followed by the y equals, and number 1. And then on top, I've got 1 minus, and then parentheses, 1 plus 0.031. Now, I probably could have done that in my head, but I'll go ahead and type it. Exponent, negative 19. And I'll go right, and again, and I'm in the bottom, that's 0.031, and then enter. Now we're rounding to 2 decimal places, which would make this 2158.07. Number 2 is the same formula, only this time we're solving for payment. Now, if you've watched the videos, there are several options for doing this. I will do it probably middle of the road. If I chose to, I could have put this program into my calculator, but I probably wouldn't choose to because I don't see this formula all that often. And again, it's the same formula that we just used, so I won't write the entire formula. I'll just write down what I have. So I've got PV, that's 21,906, equals PMT, now that's what I'm looking for, then 1 minus 1 plus I, 0.034, negative N, 64, and then I again, 0.034. Now, what I will do is I will do the calculation here, get a number, then finish solving the equation. So on my calculator, I'm going to do the fraction. That's the green key, y equals number 1. 1 minus. Now this time, like I mentioned in the previous problem, I can put the 1 and the 0.034 together in my head and not have to type the parentheses. This is 1.034 with an exponent of negative 64 and 0.034 on bottom. Now that comes out to be, as you can see here, 25.95, etc. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to write PMT and then 25.95. Now I don't actually want to use 25.95, but I'm writing that down so I'll know that that's what's there. to solve for payment, I need to divide both sides by the 25.95, etc. So this is the calculation that I need to do. 21,906 divided by that number. Now here's how I do that on my calculator. I do 21,906 divided by, now the way I say that number is second ANS. 21,906 divided by the previous answer. And so, as you can see, this is the answer, and I never had to round off. If you do this by retyping numbers, you likely will miss the problem by a few cents here or there. So this would be to the nearest cent, 844.14. And likewise, we want to do that on the last one. I'll go ahead and write this out. Same formula we used on the previous two. Now I need to solve this equation for the n, and I know that to do that is going to involve logarithms if I do it by hand, which I do in some of the other videos. However, since I just showed you this in the last chapter, I want to emphasize again how you can solve equations of this nature using your TI graphing calculator. So I'm going to take out my TI graphing calculator and go to my y equals, type 13,000 for y1, type the right hand side for y2, now on the exponent we cannot use an n doing it by this method, so we'll just replace the n with an x. Now again, that's simply because that's the way our calculator works. So there is my formula typed into my calculator. Now I know I need to draw the graph, but I already know some things about this, so I'll go right to the point. I can tell my y's need to go up to 13,000 and actually beyond. So on my window, I'm going to start my x's at 0. I don't know where to end up, but I do know my y's need to start at 0 and go to something larger than 13,000. We'll make it 14,000. And just to be not having to look at so many dots, I'll put counting by thousands. So this is what I see so far. There's my y1. And there's my y2, and as you can see, I've got a ways to go on my window settings. Of course, I only have x going from 0 to 5, but somewhere way out there, they're going to cross. So let me go back to my window setting, make x bigger, about 100, and so here's what I see on the scale x0 to 100. And sure enough, they are crossing. So, to find out where they cross, we go second, calc, number 5. We'll just move the cursor over close to where they cross and press enter 3 times. So we just solved that equation and we got 34.997, etc. Which, as you can see on the instructions, they want it rounded to the nearest integer, which would be 35. on the rest of the problems, we will use the other PV formula, or if you prefer, you can use the PV formula that we've used on the first three if you can compute the N and I yourself. However, I'm going to be using, as I said, the other PV formula, which is this one. Now, to use that PV formula, we'll just recognize that here the unpaid balance means the present value of those payments that are yet to come. Obviously, this is our interest rate, which would be a 0.1499, 14.99%. The payment, PMT, would be $200. And as you can see, the question is how long, so we're looking for the time, and so we'll use our formula PV, that's 2565.72 equals, now this is going to be PMT, 200 times 1 minus 1 plus R, 0.1499 divided by M. Now this is paid monthly, so our credit card is compounded monthly. The annual interest rate, they're calling it, 14.99, needs to be divided into 12 months. Now here we can just use the negative N, and that will come out to be number of months. And so this is what our formula would look like. Now we would solve that much like we did the previous one by graphing it on our calculator, second calc intersect, and so that should be how we would solve it. So here's how I would type those on my calculator. And here are the window settings I'm using. Now when we get the graph and see the two lines crossing, we go second, calc, 5, we get the cursor close, and press enter 3 times. And the X is what we're looking for. Now that's 14.0686. Now notice that in the instructions we are told to round up to the nearest integer. So even though this is 14.06, we want to round it up to 15. Now this problem is talking about two options, and so one option is 0% financing for 60 months. Now if there's no interest being charged, we don't need a formula for that. We will take our our purchase price, $31,735, and divide by 60. That would be our payment at 0% financing. So $528.92 is our payment on the 0 financing. And the other option is to finance it at 6.3% if we take the $6,000 rebate and subtract it from the purchase price. So that's the quantity that we would be financing. So let's subtract those. So that means we will actually be financing 24,893. So that would be our PV in our formula. 6.3% would be our R. Now that would be 0.063. Now we can use this 60 as the N. So that would be N equals 60. And then we want to find the payment. So here's what our formula looks like. We've got PV 24,893 equals PMT 1 minus 1 plus R 0.063 divided by 12, monthly financing, negative 60, and then 0.063 divided by 12. So we're kind of combining the two formulas and not actually computing the I separately. Now again, if you want to compute that separately, you can go do that. However, I'll type this into my calculator and see what I come up with. So here on my calculator is how I entered that calculation, and I came up with 484.73 for our payment using this option. And the idea of the problem is which is better. So here are our two payment options, 484 or 528. So we'll choose the smaller of the two payments, which would be the rebate. Now the amount you save is just the difference in those two numbers, which is 44.19. Now, very similar to the previous problem, we're trying to find the payment on this loan, which means using the PV formula. However, we've got another thing to consider, and that is the cost of the sailboat is $31,885, and we're paying 5% down, so the amount that we actually finance would be $31,885 minus 5%. So let's see on our calculator what that comes out to be. So we'll be financing $30,290.75. So using our PV formula and this for the PV. So substituting all the values in, this is what we have. It's going to take a little concentration to get that typed into our calculator. So here on our calculator we'll do our fraction, and then the top and the bottom. I'll go ahead and type that and not make you watch me do that. So then we have this. Now, you probably know from past problems that I'm only writing 82.06, but I now know that on my calculator I need to take the 30290.75 and divide by that previous answer, second A and S. So I didn't actually round off to 82.06, and we come up with this for our payment. To the nearest cent, that would be $369.11. So that would be our payment. Now, to find the amount of interest that we actually paid, we need to find out, first off, how much do we pay in 10 years. So what we're doing is we're paying $369.11 a month. There are 12 months in a year, and we're doing this for 10 years. So we need to multiply these together. So $44,293.20 is what we pay over a 10-year period, and the $30,290 is what we actually borrowed. So the difference in those two must be interest. And this is the same PV formula that we've used on the last several problems, so I will write out my substitutions. Now let me point out that when you're calculating the payment in the beginning, you want to use the term of the mortgage. The term of the loan is 20 years. The question is asking about some other items, but to figure payments, you figure your payments on the 20 years. Now we'll work this just like we did the previous two. Type the calculation here into our calculator and then divide the 80255 by that new number. So our payment comes out to be $574.97. Now, to find the unpaid balance after 5 years, since we have a 20-year loan, after 5 years, there will be 15 years remaining on our loan. So, we need to use our PV formula with a T equals 15 years. That's the time remaining on the loan. So our formula would go PV equals, now our payment is what we just found for our monthly payment, $574.97, and this is 1 minus, same interest rate, 6% monthly, only this is going to be 15 years monthly. Now, this is just a matter of typing this calculation, which I will pause the video and do, which you can see would come out to $68,135 and 97 cents. Now, finally, for the 10 years, since we had 20 years originally, after 10 years, that means there's 10 years remaining. So we use the same formula. Only 10 years. Now, we can simply do on our calculator the second, enter, that calls back up all the stuff that we just typed. We can go over to the 15 and change that to 10 and press enter. Now, I won't show this problem in this video. There is a separate video on working this one problem. In fact, there are two videos on working this one problem. One of those uses the programs that you could have entered into your TI calculator. The other one does all the calculations by hand.